Welcome, dear students, to this class on Horace. In the previous classes, we have seen Plato and Aristotle, and I hope it's clear Plato's and Aristotle's views on poetry. So, in this class, we'll be looking at Horace, his view on poetry, his opinion on poets, his definition on imagination, his concept of form and content, his views on drama, and his famous work, Ars Poetica. Plato and Aristotle are succeeded by many critics, Greek and Roman critics, like Horace and Longinus. Horace, who was born in 65 BC, is a lyric poet. He's a satirist as well as a critic. He studied literature and philosophy in Athens. Coming to the works of Horace, we see that he has written satires making fun of Roman life, epistles, which are sermons on morals, religion, and specifically philosophy. And then Ars Poetica, or art of poetry, principles for writing poetry and tragedy. This is the basis for Alexander Pope's essay on literary criticism that we have during the neoclassical period. So these are the three kinds of works that he has written, uh, works which he is famous for. And Horace, like Aristotle and like Plato, is trying to put forward a standard for being a good poet. He says, he brings about certain things, says that these are the do's for being a good writer, and these are the don'ts for the writer. According to Horace, the writers should write about traditional subjects in unique way. You shouldn't go for novelty. Because he says, only an extraordinary person can treat novel subjects in an excellent way. So it's easy to go for traditional subjects or familiar subjects, familiar topics. All epics must begin in medias res. For example, in medias res means in the middle of action. So this is one term that you need to remember. For short answers also you may get this term in medias res, or in the middle of action. So according to Horace, this drama epics, they should begin in medias res, in the middle of the action. There shouldn't be a superfluous introduction to the story. It should right away start in the middle of the action. And he says the poet, the writer, should avoid all extremes in the subject matter, in the choice of words, in his style, in his vocabulary. He should avoid extremities. Then a writer should avoid appearing ridiculous. He says, he refers to Virgil and Homer, and says that he shouldn't appear as a fool to the readers. And then he talks about he brings about this term sweet and useful, literature's ultimate aim, or the purpose of poetry is sweet and useful. So here he actually contradicts Plato, who was saying that poetry is not useful. And I think you remember the five objections that Plato made against poetry, and one of that is it is it's not useful to mankind. But Horace says it is very sweet and useful. The purpose is that. And coming to the subject of poetry, Horace, the poet says, for Horace, the poet should know his limitations and choose a subject appropriate to his gifts, his talents for writing poetry. So, if he is very talented, he can experiment with new subjects. But if he is not that sure of himself, not sure of his potential in writing poetry, he should stick on to familiar topics. Poets must imitate others, particularly those of the past, instead of nature. So that was a major thing that he was talking about. He should, a writer should meditate on the Greek writers, Greek masters, day and night. and then learn from them. So you can imitate those works. And then this triple E concept, that is aesthetic value of a work, then ethical value of a work, economic value of work. So these are the three E's that he talks about. Will people like it? That is sweet, useful, and about the value of a particular work. He says that is this is the ultimate purpose of poetry. The poet's task is to combine usefulness and delight, or to teach and delight. So Plato was saying poetry is not useful. But when we come to Aristotle, we have seen what is the purpose of poetry, purpose of literature according to Aristotle. That is catharsis, right? He brings in the concept of catharsis. That is, by evoking pity and fear, you are purged of the base emotions. There is the function of poetry is catharsis. But when we come to Horace, he says, poetry teaches through delight. Poetry delights us as well as teaches. You know, there is this factor of enjoyment comes here with Horace. The purpose of poetry is to teach and to delight. It's not just teaching and it's not just delight, but it teaches as well as delights. Ars Poetica, that is the art of poetry, is actually a letter which he has written to the Pizzo family. And in that, he expressed his own rules for writing poetry under three titles. One is Poesis, which talks about the subject matter, then Poema, which is about the form, and Poeta, it's about the poet. So remember, there are three divisions. We can see these three divisions in that work, Ars Poetica, or the art of poetry. Poesis, poema, and poeta. So when you're writing an essay, please make sure that you include all the points. So coming to the first part, the function of poetry. So as we have seen, for Plato, he was seeking the ideal. So the ultimate aim is to reach the ultimate reality. Because art is the copy of the copy, it takes you far away from the reality. So it's not conducive for it doesn't actually serve the purpose according to Plato. Metaphysical objection that he makes. But Aristotle, by bringing the concept of catharsis, says, this is not just a mere imitation. By evoking pity and fear, you are purged of those emotions. But to Horace, the primary thing is about the beauty that delights. The aesthetic value of a work of art. Horace was the first Roman critic, or you can say the first romantic critic who gave importance to imagination, to beauty, to emotion. The role of imagination, according to Horace, he actually gave emphasis to imagination, and he says, a poet is free to use his imagination, but he should remain true to life. Coming to Horace poems, he has written many lyric poems. He has created a intermediate space between the real world and the world of the nymphs, the Greek and Roman gods and goddesses. So he used his imagination. He laid emphasis on imagination. He was sure that there is this imagination played a very key role in poetry. Then he compared poetry to painting. You remember Plato also compared poetry to painting, but he was just talking about mere imitation. But when we come to Aristotle, he was comparing poetry to music. Here again, Horace compares poetry to painting. He equates poetry with painting, but he says it's not mere imitation, but it is a creative imagination. So, that is the term that you need to understand. According to Horace, poetry is creative imagination. According to Aristotle, it is representation. According to Plato, it was mere imitation. Poetry needs to be beautified by words. Painting needs to be beautified by colors. So that's the only difference. A poet uses words to paint something, a painter uses colors to paint something. Coming to the diction and language of poetry, that is diction, He emphasizes the right choice and arrangement of words in composition. Like Aristotle, many concepts, many standards and rules that Horace put forward. They were like, he was imitating Aristotle in his criticism. A poet is free to use both familiar and new words that come and go like leaves of a tree. So, for example, take the leaves of a tree, it's green, and after some time, when it turns yellow, it falls, right? So, likewise, there will be certain words which is there in currency now, but some can go obsolete. The words need to be used in their proper places. The appropriateness of words, the use of obsolete words should not be encouraged. So use words which are used now, used at that point of time. The language of poetry should be different from the language of common people. So that is another major deviation, that or major thing that he talks about. The language of poetry, that should be different from the common speech. Meter, he says, each type of poetry must have its own appropriate meter. For example, if you are writing an elegy, you should be writing in elegiac meter. No, so there should be an appropriate meter for the poetry that you are writing. So diction, the language of poetry, and meter, the form and the content should match. No, the style should be proper. By proper, he actually means that trivial and serious matters should not be written in the same way. If you are writing, if your play or poetry or epic is about something serious, it should be the form and style should match the content. If you are writing about something very trivial, the language and the style also should differ. You shouldn't treat both trivial and serious matters alike. Treatment of serious matters should not be in trivial form. So if the topic is very serious, don't use comic vein in that. Therefore, form and content should be matched. It should be appropriate. Then coming to his views on drama. Horace studies drama under three heads. He talks about plot, characters, and style. You remember six elements of drama that Aristotle was talking about: plot, characters, thought, diction, song, and spectacle, right? Six elements that Aristotle was talking about. So when we come to Horace, he was again talking about plot, characters, style. So coming to plot, he says, plot should be borrowed from familiar material. The chorus should be an integral part of the plot. So these are the two things that he emphasizes. One is about the content. The story should be familiar. The writers shouldn't run after novelty. And then the chorus, chorus is, right? A group of singers who make objective comments on what is happening on the stage, sings along with singing. They do some steps as well, dance as well. So these chorus, they shouldn't be a superficial element on the stage. They should have an integral role to play. And coming to the characters, they should behave naturally. For example, a slave should behave how a slave should be, in a natural manner. And a soldier should behave in that way. He shouldn't behave like a servant. And coming to the style, iambic meter was the most suitable for drama. Dramatic speech should suit the character, the sex of the character, age, and its moods. So these are a few things that he talks about. He specifically says about plot, characters, and style.